it tonight.
Okay, so what do we start with? Let's start with the habeas, because I just played the Stephen Miller video, and people are freaking out that Trump is considering invoking habeas corpus, invoking suspension of habeas corpus. And the ultimate irony is the Lincoln Project. For those who don't know, their very questionable past in relation to...
They're a pedo organization.
Wholly justifiable based on the facts in the world. The Lincoln, in addition to being that, they are also apparently totally historically illiterate, that they don't understand that Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War suspended habeas corpus in order to imprison some of his political adversaries, and they're shocked and appalled. Stephen Miller's coming out talking about the possibility of Trump suspending habeas corpus because the judges, the courts, are certifiably overriding the president's ability to govern, the executive's ability to be the executive, and overriding Congress itself. For those who don't fully appreciate what is meant when Stephen Miller says Article 3 courts don't have the authority to deal with immigration issues, could you flesh that out first and foremost? Because I think that's the critical issue that some people don't truly understand.
Lest I get a bunch of texts from my many sisters and other siblings and friends. Happy Mother's Day to all the mamas out there. Happy Mother's Day to Marion and others.
Thank you.
To give that shout out for everybody. So the Constitution provides within Article 1, which by itself provides a source of confusion because it's located in Article 1. But it's under Clause 9, and Clause 9 has a range of provisions that don't appear to be exclusive to the legislative branch. But in it says that you shall not suspend the writ of habeas corpus unless there's been a rebellion or invasion. And historically, the other presidents who have suspended habeas corpus, there's 3 of them actually, Abraham Lincoln most infamously, but at least that was pursuant to Congress passing a law authorizing him to do so. Then you had in 1863, but he continued to suspend the writ of habeas corpus beyond the scope of that law, even after the Civil War had ended. So that issue ended up ex parte Milligan, I think was the case, 1866 before the Supreme Court. Then you had Franklin Delano Roosevelt suspended the writ of habeas corpus for all the people he was detaining here in America, all those Japanese detention camps. It's amazing. Liberal Democrats seem to have complete amnesia about some of those things that they were responsible for. And then George W. Bush suspended the writ of habeas corpus to get people to Gitmo. So, because he didn't want them to have habeas protection. Now, his ability to do so was questioned at the time, and there was a mixture of results in the courts and the cases. So there's no question that in the case of invasion, you can suspend the writ of habeas corpus. The question is it a power only given to Congress or given to the president or given to the courts? Because it's located within Article 1, some people have said it's exclusive to Congress. Problem with that is the original proposal was to limit it to Congress, but in fact, that part of the proposal failed at the convention and failed at later confirmation. So when they went through and confirmed the Constitution in the referendums. So because that's what affirmed and approved it, somewhat questionably, but that's another story for another day.
Just a quick detail, because it's so outrageous that in addition to not knowing about Lincoln himself from the Lincoln Project, what was his name? It was FDR. He suspended habeas corpus
he was given no congressional authorization. Well, neither he nor Bush were given authorization. They believed the president had, pursuant to Lincoln, even though Lincoln originally did it pursuant to congressional law, he then did it on grounds that he could do things beyond what Congress had authorized.
But FDR did it to Japanese American citizens. Yep. Not like Bush did it to non-citizens or terrorists. Right. FDR did it to American citizens of Japanese
Bush tried to do it to citizens too.
Okay, it's just so amazing. Like it's not even an invading force. They were Americans who happened to be Japanese, and there
was no invasion by Japan of the United States. I mean, there was an attack on Pearl Harbor, but there was no ongoing invasion.
Okay,
and there was no invasion by terrorists beyond what happened in 9/11. It wasn't, what Trump is describing as an invasion is far more analogous to an actual invasion. 20 million plus people from foreign nations, including in the case of TDA being sent by a foreign nation, Venezuela, than ever occurred in either of those in 2 of those prior 3. Lincoln, in addition, extended the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus after the war was over, so there was no rebellion ongoing, and he applied it to his political critics in the North. So the legal political precedent on this is pretty broad in favor of Trump. That doesn't mean the rogue courts won't try to prevent him from suspending the writ of habeas corpus. The main grounds to challenge it would be the interpretation of it being only something that Congress can authorize. Though, again, they didn't say that for Roosevelt. They didn't say that for George W. Bush for the most part. There were some cases they did reverse it. But there is an argument for the. I was the one who raised it, over several months ago, that this was a possibility, and finally got into the legal zeitgeist, if you will, the stream of thoughts and ideas into the river that is the White House, and the consequences. Now Trump is seriously considering it, and because he has to. It's also a way. It's a shot across the bow to the courts themselves. It's telling the courts, if you don't step in, I will escalate. I will suspend the writ of habeas corpus and say you don't have any authority to act. And I may go further than that. I may just start ignoring court orders on the grounds that the court orders are lawless, which relates to Chief Justice Roberts' comments this week. And he was like, Article 3 has to be independent judicial branch, and we can strike down what the president or Congress does. And the follow-up question should have been, but wasn't, what happens when it's Article 3 usurping its power? What happens when it's Article 3 exceeding its constitutional authority? What's the remedy then? Historically, the courts have said, don't worry, we don't have enforcement power. We don't have the power of the purse. Well, those powers only matter if the other branches ignore the courts when the courts go rogue. Otherwise, there is the power of the purse, power of the sword don't matter. Because if they have to recognize the courts, no matter what the courts say or do, then you have a judicial supremacy. Mm-hmm. You don't have judicial balance of powers with the legislative and executive branch. And that's part of it. And so this is an area where Trump can go to try to further divest the courts of jurisdiction. Now, there's multiple laws also being passed or considered in Congress to take away their power to issue nationwide injunctions, to take away their jurisdiction in more immigration cases. As Stephen Miller mentioned in that clip, the Immigration Nationalization Act specifically stripped the courts of jurisdiction in a wide range of immigration cases. They're just ignoring that. They're just completely ignoring it, flagrantly, court after court after court after court. And what Roberts doesn't understand is that if he doesn't get the courts in line, Trump will get the courts in line by ignoring the courts, as will have to happen, as will be his constitutional duty. His constitutional duty is not to affirm what the courts do. His constitutional duty is to enforce the laws, period. And he is under no supervisory jurisdiction or control of the federal courts as to matters that have been taken away from them by law.
When it's taken away from which courts is it taken away from, and then which courts are left with jurisdiction to hear immigration issues?
No courts are given jurisdiction over a wide range of immigration issues. Literally, the specific language. This is the immigration issue, which is the Biden administration paroled a bunch of people, over 500,000 immigrants into the country, categorically. Trump reversed that and said, no more parole. The law says that is exclusively within his discretion to do. And the law says specifically, quote, no court shall have jurisdiction to review. That's that's how broad the language is. No court shall have jurisdiction to review.
And the parole to which you're referring, that's when you grant, when we were saying at the time, these are still illegal aliens. It's just that Kamala or Biden, whoever the hell was operating the pen, granted them temporary protective status, which was a sweeping blanket,
and it was protection from detention while their immigration case was pending in some manner. And it's something that can be done for humanitarian or other purposes. There were no applicable purposes. What Biden did was lawless. The law did not authorize that under these circumstances. But what did the court say? Oh, we can't review that decision. Oh, that's interesting. And now they're turning around saying, oh, no. Now that it's Trump, we're going to flip-flop and completely ignore the plain language of the law.
We were talking about at the time where we said, this is basically facilitating the invasion. And so someone in the chat saying seditious conspiracy. This is facilitating an invasion by turning the illegals, because they were illegals, into temporary protected status by simply saying, well, no longer illegal just by stroke of a pen. And now the courts are basically saying, well, that's a one-way door. You can grant them all TPS, but you can't eliminate it at a stroke of a pen on all of them. You got to go case by case to revoke it, which makes it...
Even though you're supposed to go case by case initially, right? So Biden was supposed to go case by case, did not, just granted mass parole. And so Trump can clearly by law reverse that categorically. And they're saying, no. Now you have to go through an individualized assessment. Biden never did, but you do. And we didn't have jurisdiction to review the fact that Biden's mass parole was illegal from day one. that there was the law only required specific findings of humanitarian purposes. They never did that. But the court said, no, we can't get involved because the law says there's no jurisdiction to review. And then they turn around and say, oh, we're going to pretend there is jurisdiction now. It's pure fraud by the courts. I mean, the courts are just making things up as they go along. This is the most egregious abuse of power by Article 3 in America's legal history. So there's been plenty of examples of it, but not at this scale, not at this scope, not at this self-evident manifest manner. And that's what if this is all because Roberts and the Supreme Court let this all happen when they made their ridiculous ruling a month ago or so. That, by the way, that class certification that that had not been certified, the district court just now dismissed that entire claim, and yet the Supreme Court is yet to take remedial action. And what they did is they sent a message that said, "Hey, federal judicial branch, let's be the coup against the election. We don't like what happened. Let's usurp our power to protect our professional class brethren in the bureaucratic administrative state." And the objectives and prerogatives of the Bill Gates and George Soroses of the world to effectively have open borders, to basically block Trump from doing his presidential duties and enforcing what the American people chose him to do, which was deportations of criminals. Mass deportation is now popular in the country. First time ever that has been the case. That you've had people say, yeah, I want everybody deported. Everybody. Majority of the country, I want everybody out. That's how broad and deep the commitment is, and what you have is the judicial branch causing obstacle after obstacle after obstacle in a manner that the Constitution never authorized, never approved them to do. And then the question is now, and so you have Roberts reaffirming it in his public statements this week, and he's making these statements while Justice Sotomayor and Justice Jackson, in back-to-back public appearances, greenlit this. They said, let's have a judicial insurrection against President Trump. That's the simplified, streamlined version of what they went out and preached to lefty lawyers over the past week. By the way, that was bad behavior by Justice Sotomayor, bad behavior by Justice Jackson. What does that mean? It's impeachable conduct that they've engaged in. Now, what do you have Speaker Johnson doing when he's not busy whoring for some war someplace? He's saying he's not going to allow any impeachments to go forward in the House of Representatives. Right. So, I mean, that's what you have with a completely toothless, feckless, useless Speaker of the House that, Trump cut a deal with because he thought he had no other choice but to cut a deal with. But, Trump's deference in these kind of places and spaces has caused him problems and blowback, just like having Kellogg try to negotiate with Ukraine. That was idiotic. Just like deferring to Lindsey Graham on things. That's idiotic. These are things that are never going to serve his interest. They're never going to protect him. And so that where we're at now is, since the House is not going to take meaningful action beyond some legislative restrictions on jurisdiction, it's going to be either up to Roberts to fix it or Trump to ignore them. That's where we're heading. We're heading towards that direct confrontation by fall, unless the Supreme Court steps in and cleans this nonsense up, because the House of Representatives is as toothless as they've ever been.
Can you imagine if there was an impeachment of one of the three or all three liberal judges on the bench? But Biden.
Well, imagine how ordinary Republicans in the Trump base are going to react when they see the House take no action against these rogue judges. And if Democrats win back the House, they immediately impeach President Trump for a third time. They're going to say, what useless, feckless losers you are. I mean, the biggest hurdle to Republicans building a populist majority in the House and the Senate is the Republican Party. It's their hierarchy, their donors, their political class consultants, and the people who seek office. Like Tom Tillis this past week was trying to pretend he did nothing wrong in blocking Ed Martin from being the D.C. U.S. attorney. He was out there trying to tweet all this. He's back to, I'm pretend MAGA. I'm pretend MAGA. Buy it, everybody. Tom Tillis is a big fat fraud. He always has been. Hopefully somebody serious challenges him. It's like Bill Cassidy. How is Cassidy even still a senator in Louisiana? This is a man who voted for Trump's impeachment. How in the world is a Republican populous state like Louisiana, plus 20 Republican state, have such a fraud, such a pharma whore representing that state? That there should be a major concentrated effort of MAGA to field real populist effective challengers to Tom Tillis in North Carolina, Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, and Cassidy in Louisiana. That ignore whatever Trump is saying or doing on those races. It's irrelevant. He's trying to negotiate to get stuff through the House or through the Senate. If MAGA is serious, that's the next step. They need to show they can and don't waste your time trying to primary Susan Collins in Maine. Maine is a liberal Democratic state at this point. That's just that's just giving the state a Democratic edge. North Carolina is a swing state, but very winnable for a populist Republican candidate. Trump has won it now 3 times in a row. And Louisiana and South Carolina are overwhelmingly Trump populist states. You can challenge in those primaries without thinking you're going to elect a Democrat, because ain't no Democrat win in either state, not in the current state of the Democratic Party. So the hurdle still is, the hurdle Trump faces in general is that there's a populist MAGA majority in the nation, but it's nowhere near represented on the Hill. That you maybe have half of the Republican Congress that's Trumpish, and maybe 1 out of 5 Republican senators are Trumpish. The rest are anti-Trump or never Trump at heart. And they just do various jobs of disguising it and hiding it, depending on the circumstance. And the lack of congressional support, like they're not putting the Doge cuts into law, which is further continuing the court's abilities to obstruct Doge. All of those things means Trump's going to have to take more unilateral action in all likelihood, unless SCOTUS steps in and cleans up the mess that they created.
Biden granted, from what I can tell, TPS status to 1.2 million illegals or immigrants. Yeah. The time frame for which...
And they were illegals. By the way, their legal status didn't change. They were still here illegally. They just weren't paroled. They were paroled from detention. They weren't paroled from removal. They weren't made legal. They were simply said, you won't be detained pending your immigration adjudication.
At the TPS, temporary protected status, it lasts for a certain period of time, 6 months to 18 months. What's it? It's predicated on a risk or it's predicated on not being detained while you're here seeking asylum, correct?
Usually it's people that have a very legitimate asylum claim that it doesn't make sense to detain, but to release on humanitarian purposes pending a hearing on their asylum claim.
Okay.
That typically is what it's for.
But how do you reconcile that? I mean, somebody here is either not telling the truth or being sneaky, because you have Biden granting TPS, which is their asylum seekers, and then you got Adam Kinzinger et al. Saying Ohio needed the Haitian immigrants who were granted TPS because big companies needed labor. So are they asylum seekers, or are they cheap labor? Or is it what I think it is, which is claiming they're asylum seekers so you can exploit them for slave labor by bringing French-speaking, non-English-speaking Haitian immigrants into Columbus, Ohio, not Columbus, where was it? Springfield, Ohio, so that you can use them for cheap labor to be exploited by big corporations.
Yeah, it's all the above.
Okay, so the courts are saying that you can grant sweeping protective status, but you have to eliminate it one by one. What happens at the end of whatever the time frame is for the TPS? At that point, can they be deported?
If you go, by case, then you could deport them.
Okay, so they've created.
What they're trying to do. They're saying it's okay to illegally import 20 million plus people. But in order to remove them, you have to go case by case, knowing that administratively that would gum it up so much that you're going to have very little effect deporting most of the people there. So that it's simply it's a judicial coup, a judicial insurrection against our Constitution and the election of 2024. That's all it is.
Where does it stand in the courts now? SCOTUS has yet to adjudicate on...
SCOTUS has multiple hearings or multiple emergency stay motions brought to them on this precise question.
Okay.
And the law, like I said, is crystal clear. It says none of these courts have jurisdiction. And for those that don't remember, Congress has complete control over whether any court other than the Supreme Court has jurisdiction over anything. The Constitution did not create federal district courts. The Constitution did not create federal courts of appeals. The Constitution did not create a tax court. It did not create a federal court of claims or any of the others. The Congress created those courts. The Constitution authorized them to create them, so-called inferior courts, but it's entirely their creations of Congress. They only have the power Congress gives them, and they don't have any of the power Congress specifically denies them, and yet they're just ignoring that. And this is the problem. Like, what happens when I always say, what happens when it's the judge violating the law? Mm-hmm. Who do you go to for relief? Unless you have the executive branch come in and arrest them, there's nobody, or the legislative branch impeach them. There's no remedy when the courts violate the law, and that's what's happening now. Outside of the executive branch just refusing to obey it, or the legislative branch impeaching them, here legislative reform is great. But the courts, and I'm all in favor of stripping them of jurisdiction in many of these other cases. But the problem is they're not recognizing when they're stripped of jurisdiction right now. So the legislative reform won't even fix the problem. So at this point, it's going to take either SCOTUS fixing it themselves or Trump fixing it for them by telling them, he's getting to the point where he's got no choice. That the courts are showing just how badly atrophied our system of government is. It's no longer a balance of powers when one power has all the power. And that's what's happening here. And so we'll see, like that case is before right now the Supreme Court. They have another emergency stay application on the Doge cases pending before the Supreme Court.